Hello everyone, quick reminder that good ways to support me are by liking this video or subscribing to my channel, also following me on Instagram, or even supporting me on Patreon. I'm also on TikTok. I'm trying to get better on that one, but either way, those are great ways to support me. Thank you. Hello everyone, simple gentleman's disclosure about this video. I'm going to be talking about why I chose an X300UA over a TLR or Streamlight TLR1-HL. Both great lights, but let's get into the details. So jumping right into the meat and potatoes, when we're talking about support, as far as customer service, Streamlight and Surefire are probably about the same from what I understand, at least in my experience and hearing about some other people's. Let's talk about durability, reliability. The lights are about the same. Let's talk holsters, with the exception of suppressed pistol holsters. The lights are pretty much the same in terms of what holsters you can get for them. So what about lumens? You're talking 1,000 lumens and 800, at least on my kind of dated model. I want to say they just came out with a 1,000 lumen one. However, to kind of settle that and why that doesn't really matter, let's watch this quick video comparing the two. So we've been through a bunch of factors that play into why you would buy a specific light. And they're all kind of the same when it comes to these two lights. So, why did I buy an X300 over a TLR1? I don't like screw-on lights. No, that's not the only reason. That is true though. I do like this quick removal tool. I don't really see anyone's compelling argument why everything should be screw-on. It's kind of a pain. If I had a light for every gun, I probably wouldn't care. But I have an X300 for home defense, an X300 for all my other guns, and I move it around. So that's why I don't like the screwing on. Alright, so jumping into it, it is the fundamentals of the controls and kind of coming up with a standard operating procedure for each. So when you are doing temporary versus constant on, for instance, I practice both ways. And I'm kind of shifting to more of a constant on and a more frequent actuation of the switch for the light versus temporary. So what I was doing was temporary, which means I'm modifying my grip if I'm wanting to use my light. So now in contrast, you have your constant on, which I would say you're really doing more, you're initiating it on your draw, so somewhere between pulling it out of your holster and getting the gun forward, you're initiating it. So it could be, or more as you're getting it out there. And then your grip is the same, and then hitting it with your thumb to turn it off. So this is very important. So you saw me do all that with the Surefire. Now, when I do it with the TLR, I will say it's very easy to turn it on, although my grip moves a little bit. And that's because the throw, and I'll roll in some pictures here of the controls, the geometry, so the angle and how it moves of actuating the light is very different from one to another. The TLR, you have to move further because the controls are farther out. It's not as tight. And so for constant on, it's a little bit more of a movement. I could try to use my middle or something, but that'd be weird for draw strokes. So a little bit more for constant on to get it on, and then to turn it off a little bit more, not crazy, definitely something you can train on, but for constant on for the Surefire is much easier. Now for temporary, I would say that temporary for changing your grip, I think I don't know, I wasn't having too hard a time on the range, but I do think that it was easier with the TLR by a little bit. But I did find a modified grip with the Surefire where it was effective. So, but if you combine all that, the Surefire gets the win. Now, there's another kind of part of that I'm going to get into now. So let's talk deliberate movement for a second here. If you want this light on, the TLR, you just have to move this switch, right? So, switch. Now, constant on is down with this finger, up on this side. Temporary is down on this side, up on this side. So, depending on what you're wanting, it's a little bit inconsistent. Now, you can train through it. I'm not saying it's a bad light. The Surefire, your constant on is a completely different movement. You're pushing forward on these little nubs, and to constant on, it's either direction, up or down on either side. So that lends itself to being a little simpler to overcome in terms of stress, because your movements are very different, and so you are kind of cutting out the possibility of being confused. Now, think about someone confusing a gas and brake. They're very similar, use the same foot, they're very similar movements, whereas if they were very different, it would be something that possibly would be confused less. Now, could it still be confused? Yes. Humans, error happens. But that is something I took into account. Now, with that, I will say that the movement, I thought that pushing this forward would be very similar to the XC1, which is my concealed carry light. So I want the movement to be as similar as possible. At the time, the TLR7 didn't have the alpha or whatever upgrade version, so it had very different toggles. Now, a moment ago I talked about things being very different. That's for constant versus temporary manipulation. However, when I'm wanting to temporarily engage a light, I want it to be the same for every light. Going back to, I'm doing all X300s. So after this review, I'm selling this TLR1 to help pay for the X300 I just bought to replace it, because I didn't want different operations, especially whereas this TLR1 was on a gun that I hardly ever fire, but may need to when I'm completely out of it, because it's my home defense gun. It's next to my bed. Well, I would rather have a setup that I'm very used to, that I shoot often, in the form of another gun. So almost identical gun upstairs, but it has X300, which is how I normally fire this Glock 17. So I think I've kind of hammered that point to death. Now next, caveats and variables. Really for this, the only caveat and variable is you. It's all about how you train on your equipment, and really how your hands are too. Your fingers, how big your hands are, what kind of gun you have, how they grip the gun. It's all going to come down to you. So, whatever you think is the most important is how you should choose your light. But I would consider training and operation to be a big part of it. You got a lot of people throwing up cool pictures of their gun with either light on Instagram, but they're not necessarily using that light. So when they start, at least dry fire practice, as you can see, I've rolled in footage of live fire, but when you're talking dry fire practice, just some of that can tell you how you're using your gun. If I do a more forward grip, so maybe you need to modify your grip a little bit, but either way, you're going to learn some things about your equipment. Trying these out in the store even, and just seeing how they feel. One thing John Lovell talks about on his channel is he's mentioned that these Streamlights tend to be a little easier to accidentally discharge. And here's an example. Now that's never happened with my X300. Again, I'm not saying the Streamlight is a bad light, but these are all things to consider. John Lovell has seen many accidental discharges of white light in his classes. I have seen a few working on this review on my own. And I'll admit, when this light was sitting on my gun in my safe and I didn't think about that stuff much, or dry fire practice thinking about these things, I never foresaw any of these issues. But then when I started actually paying attention to the operation of the lights, and actually testing things out and grips and things, and checking out methods and training and tactics, I started to kind of make up my mind on what I preferred. So another thing I'll throw in is that when it comes to my suppressed pistol holsters, pretty much all of them except for the Cry require an X300. The Armadillo X4V2 requires specifically the X300U A model, which is the quick removal. So, just food for thought. If you're interested in any of those, you can see my video on the suppressed pistol holsters and how they work. They're all pretty great. Ragnarok one coming soon. Anyway, let's get on to the close. So overall, both these lights are great. As I really addressed at the beginning of the video, in terms of quality, service, reliability, all that kind of stuff, Lumens being different even isn't really a thing, as you saw in the beginning. So what it really comes down to is someone picking the light that works for them. But I guess a lot of people go for Streamlight just because it's less expensive. And that is a good reason to factor in. That's a very good reason. There's a reason I didn't mention it at the beginning, because they are not even when it comes to price. However, what you need to know is when it comes to how your grip is and how you're efficiently shooting, the light is going to factor in. And how your draws are, all that's going to factor in. So you need to make sure that spending a little less money isn't making you a little less effective when it comes to shooting your weapon. So, just food for thought. Now, this has been James Donaldson with The Contemporary Gentleman, and until next time, keep your composure.